Good afternoon, everyone, and warm welcome to Koloke with Faria. The topic we will explore today is one of immense importance in education. An inclusive classroom, a requirement in today's schooling system. In an era where diversity is our greatest strength, creating inclusive classrooms is more than just a goal, it's an imperative. To guide us through this crucial conversation, we are honored to have Mr. David Muir as our guest speaker. Mr. David is a fellowship member of the Chartered College of Teaching and an advisory board member of FEHM. With over 20 years of experience in school leadership, he has left an impressive mark on the field of education through his work in school improvement, inclusion, and leadership development. Mr. David has held prestigious roles, including Her Majesty's Inspector for Offset, Principal Inspector for KHDA, and Education Advisor for UK Department for Education. He has also worked internationally, supporting curricula such as IB, National Curriculum for England, US Common Core Standards, and others. His extensive expertise makes him the perfect guide for today's discussion. Thank you for being with us, Mr. David. Before we dive into these questions, would you like to say a few words to set the stage for our conversation?
Yeah, just to say, as you all know, this is a very important topic of conversation that many people do try to tackle and get their heads around, because every school is different. Every school has different cohort. Every country has different curricula, but everybody is now pointing at the idea that inclusion must be more widespread, and it's not just about special needs, but it's about the whole range of students meeting their full potential. So I must, agree that it's a massively important topic that people really do need to understand.
Thank you, Mr. David, for taking us through this important topic that we are going to discuss today. We will be taking questions from the audience as well. If you have any question, drop a comment and Mr. David will respond. Now let's dive into the heart of today's discussion. I have a series of questions that will help us uncover this important topic that is inclusive classrooms. So let's get started. My first question is, how do you define an inclusive classroom and what are its key components?
Okay, I'll start with a quote by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who was a politician, an Indian politician. And he said, inclusion is not about teaching differently, it's about teaching better. When we recognize the potential in every student, we move beyond mere access to true empowerment. And I think if we understand those words, we know that pretty much every aspect of a classroom has to address the issue of inclusion. So what I've done is I've narrowed it down to 5 areas. I think there might be more, but please bear with me if I miss one or two. But I think obviously the physical environment is massively important. So as soon as you walk into a classroom, you want to know that it is an inclusive environment in which students can work and have their needs met. So that would look like maybe you can have flexible seating arrangements. You'll change student groupings depending on different activities. Sometimes your seats will be in rows, sometimes they'll be in groups, sometimes they'll be individual. But you have to have that flexibility built in, otherwise you're tied into one form of teaching, which may not necessarily suit all students. So you do need to be flexible as a teacher in what your school environment looks like. And I do still see a lot of classrooms where they have the traditional rows facing the front approach. And that puts the teacher at the center of the classroom. Whereas we should be looking at how we can make students the center of learning in each classroom. So that's why we also need to have group arrangements for chairs and so on, for tables. There needs to be accessibility, obviously. If there's a child in the class, maybe who has mobility issues or maybe has visual issues or whatever, they also need to have full access to the classroom environment without hindrance or without any danger coming to them. And we also need to have, if space allows, calm, sensory friendly spaces. So there might be a corner where there's soft cushions, or there might be a place where students can go for a few minutes to chill out if they're getting a bit overwhelmed or overstimulated by the environment. So environment is a really important one. That's the initial impression you get as you walk into a classroom. Obviously, then we look at teaching and learning to make sure that students know what they're learning. And if you look at research nowadays points at making sure that students know what they're learning. So visible learning, it's called in some cases, but effectively it's making sure that the students have clear learning objectives, but also they know what their successful learning looks like. So I through some strong student-friendly success criteria that all students can understand. And those success criteria might be scaffolded in a way that's based on ability, or they might be scaffolded in a way that students can show their learning. So they might have a situation where they have a success criteria which allows them to present their successful learning through different modalities. So they might do a role play, they might do a presentation, they might do a podcast, they might do an essay, but there are those different outcomes that students are allowed to tag on to show that they have learned effectively in their lesson. Because I think what we do quite often see in lessons is that students who have more challenges to their learning don't know how to show their understanding because they're not given that opportunity. Sometimes the teacher dictates, to show your learning, you have to write an essay or something along those lines. Whereas, unless the objective is to write an essay, you should be allowed to show your understanding of the topic through other means. Hope that makes sense. Is that because I think different students feel comfortable showing their learning in different ways. Also, within the classroom environment, in terms of teaching and learning, you'll see what some people call universal design for learning, or something similar to that, where there could be different ways of supporting learners. There could be visual supports, there could be infographics, there could be graphs, charts, images to reinforce topic, or it could be through the written word. There could be auditory support, so there might be listening, there might be lectures, there might be opportunities to read aloud. There's hands-on learning, exploratory learning, or project-based learning, or other such methods of learning, role plays, for example. But a lot of collaborative learning is really important, and I think to see that in lessons. And group work should be, I think, unless there's a strong reason for it, they should be heterogeneous in terms of how students are grouped. Because if you have ability-based groups, then the research suggests that the students in the high ability groups do better, but the other students do not benefit from that arrangement. Whereas if all the students are mixed up in terms of their levels, then there should be a good opportunity for them all to make good progress in their classes. Also, assistive technology you would expect to see in lessons in terms of teaching and learning. Classroom culture, acceptance, tolerance, whatever you want to call it, growth mindset approach, student-centered learning, all really important. That show the teacher knows the students well, meets their needs through inclusive teaching. I think just generally having a culture that promotes respect, promotes belonging, where students can feel safe. Whatever they bring to the class, they know they feel safe. They know they can express themselves, be themselves, and feel relaxed and comfortable in a way that maybe they can't in other places. Empathy building, really important, making sure that there's opportunity for students to be empathetic with each other, to make sure that they can understand each other, look at people who are different to them and understand them, and get to know why those differences are there and what those differences bring to the learning environment in a positive way. Student interactions, peer support, really important. As I said before, mixed ability groupings encourages students to learn from each other. You don't have to just do it on their own. Really, even the evidence that what we traditionally call high ability students can benefit from sharing their knowledge with low ability students and vice versa. So I think, but we have to get away from this idea of ability. I think this idea of ability is becoming a bit outdated. We have to make sure that we look at students as they are on that particular day, I think it's very unusual to find a student who is consistently high ability in all areas or consistently low ability in all areas. And what we have to do is to give them the opportunity to express themselves, express their learning in each of those areas where they feel they maybe need to learn more. There needs to be collaborative learning. We traditionally now use things like think, pair, share, jigsaw activities, reciprocal teaching, a buddy support, whatever you want to call it. Also showing that there are leadership roles within the classroom that all students have access to. There's a lot going on there. And then, of course, in the end, I think the idea of assessment is really important. Some students need to be assessed in more traditional ways to maximize their, the fact that they can show their learning, whereas some other students need the teachers to be a bit more inventive. As I said before, maybe producing a piece of work that is not so traditional, producing a piece of work that meets the learning needs of that particular student. I've seen in some of the schools I work with, when we've implemented this, some students bring their guitars in, they write a song to explain a particular item. So, for example, there was one which was a national curriculum of a particular country, and the students were singing a song about the constitution of that country. And other people were doing role plays, other people were writing it, but it gave that flexibility, and students felt really comfortable in order to show their different styles of learning. I know the AK is a bit outdated these days, but students still have different needs in how they demonstrate their learning. So I think in terms of what I would see in a class, I've gone on quite a long time there, but there are those 5 particular areas that I would expect to see as a consultant, as an inspector, as a school leader, going on to convince me that the classrooms are inclusive. Okay, over to you again.
Thank you for sharing your insights, Mr. David. Collaboration and giving a voice to the students and appreciating their choices and giving them the options to explore. I think you have shared some wonderful examples. And the quote that you shared in the beginning that really sets the foundation for understanding inclusion. My next question is somewhat related to what you have said. I'm going to talk about technology now. So, how can technology can be used to support inclusive educations, but particularly for students with diverse learning needs?
Yes, technology is again obviously massively important in our lives, isn't it? And it always has been. But with the advent of AI and the rapid development of different tools now across the board, I think everybody now benefits from the use of technology. But I think technology, if used correctly, and I have this interesting conversation with myself quite often about the use of mobile phones, because people become very entrenched in either mobile phones are a good thing or mobile phones should be banned in schools. I go into a lot of schools where mobile phones are banned, and I have a bit of a problem with that, because I think mobile phones are here; they're here to stay. They're not going to go away. I mean, when I was young, obviously we didn't have mobile phones. I'm afraid I'm not that old, but to me, the important thing is that students know how to use technology appropriately. They don't abuse it. They don't use mobile. Shouldn't be allowed to use mobile phones in a way which corrupts their use. But they have to learn how to use mobile phones in a safe environment. They have to learn how to use technology in a safe environment. So I think when used well, technology does enhance accessibility, engagement, and can help you easily for a teacher to present differentiated activities and differentiated instruction to students. I see that a lot in the schools I support through various platforms. The teachers can easily give differentiated work, in a flipped learning style, so that students come to the lesson with different starting point, different expectations, and that initially starts the lesson from a very interesting perspective, as students can share their knowledge that they've picked up, and that can get that jigsaw thing sort of style of learning working. You do need AI-driven learning and assistive tools now. I think there's no getting away from it. Things like ChatGPT, or there are obviously other platforms